Welcome to the Feel Good Lab podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Gresh. Join me as we bring together the brightest minds in health and wellness, covering topics from sleep and nutrition to exercise and mindfulness. Our goal is to give you actionable advice to optimize your health and ultimately to feel good. All right, welcome to another episode of the Feel Good Lab podcast. And I get pretty excited about all these, James, but this one's cool because we've been working with you at the Feel Good Lab for quite a while, but way more importantly, your test, the food inflammation test, has been game-changing for my dad and my brother Mike at our family compounding pharmacy and functional medicine practice. They've been working with you for well over a decade, and they found that this tool was probably the biggest tool that they had in their toolbox, because everybody comes to them looking for a pill or a cream or a silver bullet for conditions, but oftentimes it's understanding what's causing that. And we are what we eat. And the one thing I'll say before I go ahead and let you introduce yourself is every single person that we've used this test on, we found at least one healthy food that in their body is uniquely causing low-level inflammation. And we'll get into the details of why that's a problem and what we can do about it. But I'd love you to just tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what brought you to really become the CEO of KBMO.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I mean, and the nice thing is, as like you, we're a family-owned and run business. Not everyone knows it, but K stands for Catherine, my wife, B for Ben, my son, M for Max, my other son, and as we always say, we save the best to last, and O for Olivia, my daughter. So it's always great, like the Gresh family, the White family have been at this for a number of years as well. So it's I think that's why you guys are so successful, and I think why we're trying to emulate your success is because it's a family-run company and it means something to us all in terms of trying to make sure that we take care of our clients and our customers as well as we possibly can. And so I think that's one thing which is, I think, certainly resonates among many kind of good things that you guys have done that we're trying to kind of copy as much as we can here at KBMO as well. But my journey was one of being involved in diagnostic testing for now 25 plus years. I was involved in blood gas analysis, a thing called an e-nose, which is probably enough for a good hour or so, which we won't bother with now. But and then some molecular testing, which was fascinating to kind of look at. Probably 15 years ago now, some of the kind of forefront of genetic testing in terms of what was going on there. And then I kind of got involved in some cardiovascular testing and found it fascinating, but found really at the end of the day, these really sharp cardiologists were basically telling people, eat less and exercise more. And in not a very much more kind of profound way than that. So I was like, I've just been doing all this genetic testing, which is all about, individualizing care and information. And fundamentally, we're telling people to eat less and exercise more. There's got to be a better way of doing that. And so as part of that kind of journey, I was very fortunately introduced to Dr. Brent Dorval, who was the founder of Brendan Bioscience, which is the business I bought. And he developed this unbelievable test, which was looking at how do you individualize that care around people's diet and what they consume. And so that route was really kind of like an aha moment for me, having run large public companies with offices all around the world. It was fun to kind of get back to the basics of how can we support providers and how can we give their patients these unbelievable tools to enable the provider to kind of come out with some great successes for the patients, but also enable the patients to take control of their own health as well. Because fundamentally, it doesn't matter if you're sat in the US, the UK, or New Zealand. It's fundamentally going to be, if you want to improve your health, it's going to be an individualized decision and something that you want to do. And so our thinking was, how do we take the brilliant science that we were fortunate to come across and then put it in a format that then enables not only the provider, but also the patient to run with that and see these great outcomes that I hear about on a daily basis, which is great. But whilst we've got you on, Brian, I want to hear about some of the great success stories you guys have been having, not only with your products, but also in combination with the KBMO test. Because I
Yeah.
always say it's a great test, but it's in the hands of a great provider. And so you and your family are the archetypal example of what we talk about in terms of great providers.
Well, the thing I'll say, the most important thing about this test is it's all about compliance.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't matter what you know, what you test, the data that comes back, if people don't make those changes, then nothing is going to change. And what I love about the test is, one, it's easy to take. We mail it to your home and you're able to basically take it, send it to the lab, and within about 2 weeks, you get your results back. But it's easy to implement in the way that you deliver the results. And so we've been able to see some incredible, these are anecdotal stories that I'll go through between some of the people my dad has worked through at the pharmacy and we've worked with here at the Feel Good Lab. But what's cool is we are a pain relief company, and we brought this test on because out of control inflammation is one of the main root causes of chronic pain. This test has allowed us to transition into a true wellness company, which is more my passion. I certainly love helping the people in chronic pain because we can make a huge impact. And diet absolutely is a key component of that. But we're now working with people from all walks of life: chronic conditions, autoimmune disorders, pain, elite athletes. And even this is my most exciting one because it's what's giving me a lot of hope of where the medical model is really going. We are working with a lot of younger people in their teens, late teens, early 20s, who are investing in this test because they understand that we are what we eat. And if we have the ability to make these changes now, then we can make incredible lasting changes that are going to change the trajectory of our entire life. And they're looking at it as in a performance way, from a brain function, GI health, energy, sleep. And so we'll get into some anecdote or some of the stories, but I'm going to give you my favorite one because it's myself. And everyone's got a unique story, right? So I knew that I didn't feel good when I ate pizza, bread, burgers. But guess what my diet consisted of? Like any mid-20s, year old guy in the United States, that's what I was eating. And I kind of just assumed that was normal. It's one of those things. I didn't know how sick I was until I got healthy. So did I know that pizza wasn't good for me? Yeah. Did I know it probably wasn't making me feel great? Yeah. But I was doing nothing about it. And my dad was harping on me like, right, this test has been an incredible tool, and we want to start using it as a preventative measure to get ahead of some of these chronic disease. So I took the test. In fact, I've taken it a few times, but I have my original test results from January of 2017. So over 7 years ago. And sure enough, dairy, gluten, off the charts for me. 4+, inflammation. Here's why it was such a game changer for me, James. I knew that wasn't good for me, but now I had the data, and it gave me the confidence to make the change. All my dad asked me to do was cut these foods out for 8 weeks. He's like, you can eat them again. It doesn't mean you can never have them. So I cut them out for 8 weeks. And there were a few other foods on there, eggs as another example. And to be honest, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the 3 common culprits that we see in most people. Not necessarily all of them like me, but most people have at least one, if not 2 of those. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean they're definitely the big 3. I mean, one of the fun things about running a technology company and having a lot of smart people working with us is we're developing new tests, and one of them is rapid test around those big 3. Because again, I think fundamentally, if you can get people to do nothing else but to look at their reaction to those 3, it's a great starting point. Not the end point, but a great starting point to at least to your point, give them some data to work out what makes sense in terms for them as individuals.
Yeah. So here's what happened for me. I cut those foods out for 8 weeks, and I didn't know how sick I was until I cleaned up my diet. I started feeling much, much better. But of course, 8 weeks goes by, and what do you think the first thing that I'm craving? It's a slice of pizza. I couldn't wait. And even though I felt better, I still was like, maybe it's not the pizza, hoping it's not. Sure enough, when I reintroduced that pizza, I felt way worse than I ever did before. And it doesn't mean that I can never have pizza again for the rest of my life, but I just understand the repercussions. And so because of that, I have it maybe once every quarter, once every 6 months, just long enough for me to forget how bad it makes me feel for a few days, because ultimately I can't afford to have those feelings and basically feel like I want to lay in bed all day just from the food that I'm eating. So this test for me triggered a huge change in my ability to look at food as fuel for my body and not really as this drug that just makes me feel good. And so since then, 2017, changing my diet has been the number one thing I've done for my health. And it's one of the reasons that we decided to bring this test on underneath the Feel Good Lab, because we wanted to get it out to more people. And so it's been an amazing tool for us. Again, like I mentioned, we have people from all walks of life, not just people that are sick that want to take this test. And we have had some of the most amazing case studies. I'm going to give you a couple. These are anecdotal, doesn't mean everyone's going to have the same. We have a couple of people that have suffered from gout that have, when they've reintroduced their foods one at a time, have correlated it back to one food. And it's actually consistently been the same for these three different people. It was eggs in all three. Anecdotal doesn't mean we could do a placebo double-blind study and say that eggs cause gout. Absolutely not. But in these three individuals, they happen to be related, which I think is probably an important nuance there from a genetic component. But that was one of those amazing studies, because after the first person had these great results, sure enough, other people in the family that also suffered came to us to take the test. And that's what we found. The word of mouth for what we're doing with this has been so powerful, because people can see some significant changes, and oftentimes they're changes that are even more profound than they ever expected. It's not, they may come to us with GI symptoms and look to improve, and then feel so much better from an energy standpoint, sleep better, performance, all sorts of different areas of their life start improving. And so when they start telling this story to people, it's really a compelling argument for people, whether they're sick or just want to really identify a more personalized diet for themselves. Those are the type of people that come to us and really are excited to take the test.
I mean, it's a story I hear a lot, which is great. And again, nothing against all our great providers. They're not necessarily as marketing savvy as yourself, for example. And I'd put it right up there with organizing their sock drawer of excitement to kind of go out and do some marketing. But what they do tell me is, it's unbelievable, James. We get the number of, a member of a household will come, they'll do the tests, they'll have a great result. And before we know it, we've got all the other family members coming in and running the test. And what they tell me is like, this is amazing. We've never been able to kind of connect those dots of, I've got one person feeling better, and so how do I then attract, more customers, patients into the clinic? So that, for them, it's a revelation in terms of that way as well. It's like, they're extending the number of people that they're helping, which, fundamentally that's what they're all about and what they really love. But they're using, the great results they're getting from the test to do that. One small point on the success you've had with young people as well. My daughter, the O for Olivia, she took some tests back to her school because she said, look, I've been telling my, all it must have been a very long and boring snowstorm, because they were talking about what their dad does for work. But they took the test back because a number of her girlfriends, who are all elite athletes, all about to go off to college, and they had stories like you just described, Ryan, for yourself, where they weren't eating great. And we identified for them, a couple of them, it was gluten as well, and another one was eggs. And it's transformed them in terms of, what they're doing. So again, for all those parents who are slightly worried about kids making decisions on colleges and heading off next year, it's a great time to do the test, because again, you can identify some of those foods that may not make them be feeling well. And like as Ryan described, you don't realize how sick you are until you know. And so these things would be great to look at in terms of that kind of population where they're young. And I think the great news is they're enthusiastic to find out more and learn. And so I think that's, to Ryan's point about the data, this is a great data set that they can have and can help them in terms of as they transition into the next stage of their lives.
Absolutely. So James, let's take a step back. And, a lot of people that listen to our podcast, they've taken the test. But there's a lot of people out there that don't know what this is. So why don't you give us a little context to exactly what this test looks at? And then I'd love you to compare it to food sensitivity tests. And I'll give you a caveat. We're doing some amazing work with some athletes. And one of the major pushbacks we get from different nutritionists that are involved with these sort of decisions is, isn't this IgG test just going to measure what they're exposed to? It's a lot of pushback. And now we have a good answer for it, but I'd love to hear your perspective. So, what are we testing here with the food inflammation test? And what makes it different than a traditional food sensitivity test?
Sure. So the great thing is we're testing 176 different foods, colorings, and additives, and we'll go into that colorings and additives being an important element as we go through. But fundamentally, best described to me by again, this made me laugh the other day. I was on a similar show, and someone said to me, I said, this test was best described by one of our providers in Chagrin Falls. He went, "Oh my God, my brother lives there." But anyway, that aside, which is in Ohio, because obviously everyone knows where Chagrin Falls is. And so the provider there said, "James, what I tell all my patients is this test is measuring the whole immune system versus half the immune system." And so not only we're covering your entirety here, but with the IgG test that Ryan was mentioning, they're only measuring what you're exposed to, i.e. what you're eating. And so I would argue most of us have got a pretty good memory of what we're consuming, but what we don't know, and where this test really differentiates itself, is which of those foods is causing an inflammatory response, i.e. inflammation in a range of different symptoms, from migraines to gut related, as Ryan was mentioning, skin related, all many different areas. If you think about it, inflammation is the root cause of pretty much every disease state. So what it really does is gives you a great way of not telling you what you're exposed to, but actually zeroing in on the foods which cause you inflammation. And as Ryan was giving some great examples about gout there, generally a handful of foods, so 5 to 10 foods. So they're not overwhelming when you think about it in terms of how can I be compliant to this. And so with this test, it's doing a number of things. It's eliminating the foods that you're exposed to which are not causing you inflammation, which would come up if you just ran an IgG test. It's pinpointing the foods that you're consuming which are actually causing you that inflammation, which is the root cause of the symptoms that you're presenting to when you see your provider, or whether you go in and see Ryan. So that's the great difference with this test. It's taking away, I would say, the noise and the chatter, and enabling it to really zero in on the handful of foods which are actually causing you inflammation, which when you do eliminate those, and generally what we see is the best results are, up to 3 months. But as Ryan said earlier, you can reintroduce them. So this isn't forever. This is to take them out for 3 months and see how you respond in terms of improving. By reducing that overall level of inflammatory burden should then give you an opportunity of improving the symptoms that you presented with when you came in to see Ryan or whoever your provider might be. So the idea is it's taking out the false positives, which are the noise, as it were, measuring the whole immune system and zeroing in on the foods which cause you inflammation. And that's the big difference here. And that's why we see higher levels of compliance, because you're taking out those foods which you don't need to take out unnecessarily, and really zeroing in on the ones which are the problem makers, i.e. the ones causing you an inflammatory response.
And now, James, would you also say that there's an accuracy improvement? Because the engineer in me says, okay, a typical sensitivity test looks at IgG, immunoglobulin G, that's an immune response. This test looks at the IgG plus the complement protein C3d. And that complement protein is that other side of the immune system you talked about that's giving us the insight on the inflammatory reaction. So it's very important. But now all of a sudden we go from one signal. So if you need a false positive and you're looking at one signal, it's pretty easy for that to happen. But when you need both signals to be present, I've got to imagine the accuracy goes up.
Absolutely. And again, you can look at accuracy in terms of the classical sensitivity and specificity, or I would say way more important from a patient standpoint, the getting rid of these foods which are are false positives. So they're ones that you didn't have to take out of your diet. But if you just look at the IgG only, it's overwhelming, because I did an IgG only test, and I won't mention the brand of it, and then I did my test on the same day. And so if you want to kind of compare that from an accuracy standpoint, the IgG only came up with 25 plus foods. My test came up with 5. So that's where I would say the accuracy, as it were, in terms of from a layman's perspective, is because you don't want to be taking out 25 foods unnecessarily when you can take out 5 by working with a test that, to Ryan's point, is looking at those multiple pathways, or back to our great provider in Chagrin Falls, the whole immune system versus a fraction of it. You want to measure everything you can, and that's the beauty of this test.
Yeah, and another cool thing is, Dr. Brent Dorville, who developed this. So he's pretty famous. He developed the first, I believe, at-home AIDS diagnostic test. Is that
That's
correct?
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he's brilliant when it comes to this kind of thing. But from an outsider looking in, when you got involved and brought your experience, and it seems like when I go to your lab, we visited a couple times. It's absolutely amazing. It is very let's see, what's the word? High quality, I will use. This test might seem simple. You put a couple blood spots on a piece of paper, you mail it into the lab in a biohazard bag. But when you actually see the quality controls and how structured and stringent some of those things are, I mean, tell us a little bit about how you look at that and how you were able to kind of up level what was invented.
Yeah. Well, I think that, always give full credit to Dr. Dorval, as you mentioned. I mean, he's invented this incredible test. And what we've tried to do is, in essence, demystify some of the science to make it straightforward for patients and for providers. But behind that, there's a lot of work goes into that. So what we've tried to do is control the entire value chain to make sure that if we can exquisitely control where the foods come from, for example, make sure they're all organic, make sure that everything is run in an FDA registered facility. So again, it gets inspected by that group. It's also run in a clear, high complexity lab. So we've brought all those things into place to continually improve the quality of the product. So I'm a great fan of, it's just improving the 1 or 2 or 3, 4% on everything you do. That really has a monumental difference in kind of turning up the quality of the product. So everything now in our manufacturing is fully automated. So again, that continues to be kind of developed in terms of to make that automated. The same thing in our clinical lab. A good example is, we have now over 10 lab techs running these tests. Every quarter, we compare the samples, not only lab to lab, and we have 4 labs around the world running this, but we also do it tech to tech to make sure the accuracy of these results is uniquely works, whether it's one of our labs in Chengdu, China, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Mexico City, or Hopedale, Massachusetts. So again, we're a world leader in this stuff because we've continually improved on a very good base product. But again, if you're going to do it in the tens of thousands that we're now doing it at, you want to make sure that those quality standards are uniquely applied from the FDA, from CLEAR, and all these other standards we work with as well, ISO, to make sure that we love getting inspected because that gives us a way of showing how well it's working. Or if there's any kind of wrinkles in the system, then we can make sure we continually improve what we're doing. And again, just as a company, and one of the things I love doing is we have lunches with all the employees. We just have 5 people at a time. And the only question we ask them is, what can we improve? How do we improve things? Because again, we've gone from running the first month we did this, we ran 30 tests and we thought we were complete local heroes. We're at many factors above 30 now a month. So again, as we continue to grow, the reality is how do we make sure that we're getting the input from these really smart individuals that work for us in the company now to make sure we're continually improving all the processes we have, to make sure that we're taking full advantage of their excellence and brains to improve all the processes that we have within the company.
I like your point about demystifying. I want to give you my perspective on what's going on in the lab. I'd love you to, add a little context. So the way that I look at it is, we're taking our blood sample. So that's the personalized piece. So we're sending in these 5 spots on a card. And basically your lab is taking, you mentioned organic food. So you're taking an organic version of a food protein and you're combining it with our blood and a reagent to measure this immunoglobulin and complement protein response. Is that correct?
It's a great description.
Cool. Nothing, no correction.
Yeah. No. And the only thing I would say is that even the complement. So there's a thing called a cell line that we purchased from a gentleman in Sweden who was the godfather of complement medicine. So we even own that. So the idea with everything we do is to control it. Because again, if you can control all these aspects, then again, that kind of enhances the quality. If you're just going to a catalog that sells a C3D and trying to buy that in, you don't have any idea how that's been controlled. And so that's a really important element to it. The same with all the foods. I can even tell you who caught the mackerel that's on our Fit 176 plate. Because again, for us, it's personal. It's a family company. We want to make sure we control everything to make sure that if a provider is taking the trust that they're going to run a KBMO test, that we can kind of reciprocate that by knowing that the quality of the results that we put out are as high as they possibly can.
Yeah. So one of the cool things is I pulled up two of my test results. I have the one I took back in 2017, the one that honestly changed my life, and the one that we did when I visited you last year to run a retest to kind of see where things are. And we did that not because I needed it, but more because I wanted to just see what stayed the same, what was consistent. And I think that's what's unique about this test versus some of the other tests that only look at IgG is you're going to see a huge variance depending on what you're exposed to. I mean, we're talking about 6 years later. So it's a big difference. And I've made some massive dietary changes. So, and I feel a lot better too. So my stomach, I think, is in a much better place, which we'll talk about the gut barrier panel in a minute, but I think that plays a role. What was very interesting is about 80% of my test results stayed the same. In fact, my core, I always love when I work with a patient and we see redundancies around egg whites and egg yolks, gluten, whole wheat and gluten wheat, right? Casein, which is the main protein in dairy, and cow's milk. When we see both of those, to me, that's a great signal because one, now you have two things that you only have to really focus on one food, but it also is giving us another sense of accuracy and optimism towards cutting that out and getting two bangs for your buck. So for me, I still had the egg white and egg yolk. I still had the casein and cow's milk, and I still had wheat gluten and whole wheat. So those were still there. However, the order of them shifted, which I found to be pretty interesting. I pretty much went from, as an example, casein and cow's milk being 4+ for me. And then since the test, I never really liked dairy to begin with. I think that's probably a piece of my body saying this isn't it, but I completely cut it out. Now it sneaks in some places. So I wouldn't say I'm 100% dairy free. Do you think that does play a little bit of a role, or is it just as time goes on and I change as a person? What do you think would cause those to shift from an inflammatory perspective?
There's certainly an inflammation, and you're healing your gut as well. So we'll talk about the gut barrier panel next. But the reality is, if you can, and it's funny, when I took mine, I was egg, milk, and wheat as well. And in my kind of journey, my triglycerides were very high. I took my medical after Christmas, which is probably good piece of advice, a good biohack, I think they call it now. That's not the time to do your medical. But in terms of, I then kind of eliminated those foods pretty aggressively for a 6-month period. My triglycerides halved. And so triglycerides it's a cardiovascular marker. And it pretty much, if you ask any of your physicians, it's a lifestyle marker. So if you're having too much fun, your triglycerides will be through the roof. If you're taking care of yourself and doing the right things, that will come down. And again, it's an inflammatory cardiovascular marker. So that in my journey was I took the view, look, I want to be healthier. I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. And so that was for me almost like the kind of the external marker of how do I feel when I get rid of those 3 foods. And so as I brought them down, and then a bit like you with your pizza, if I have exposure to some of those things, I know that there's going to be side effects to that. So I try and make sure that I can use that as a kind of monitor. So I would suggest over that 7-year period, not that you matured, because I'm sure you were a very mature individual when I first met you, but in terms of how you treat those things, I think as we all get older, we want to make sure we're looking after ourselves. We want to have a long and healthy life. And so if we know we've got these triggers we can control, I suspect over time you've seen a reduction in the exposure, and equally you've healed your gut. So I think the other point about these things, everything is interlinked, whether it's cardiovascular health, gut health, or your food sensitivity. So I think that's one of the interesting things about all these things. And we'll go onto our gut barrier panel and talk about that. I mean, that might be a good
Perfect
segue
transition.
from that,
And let me start with myself, because this is something I'm pretty proud of. My gut was a mess. So we did the test with you, gut barrier panel, red across the board. And I did some additional testing on my gut because the doctor that my dad and I were working with said, "Hey, we got to dig in here. This could be a serious problem." And it was. She was basically told us that if I didn't make some of these dietary changes by the time I was 40, there was going to be some serious repercussions. And again, now in hindsight, thinking of how sick I felt, it makes sense. So one of the best things is I knew this would be the case when we redid the test and you actually had introduced some new gut barrier panel. So we were looking even at more things. I was green across the board, negative. And I knew I had healed my gut. And we can talk a little bit about anecdotally how I did that. It's not going to be the same for every person. But the point is that our gut lining is only one cell thick. And I learned this from you. It's very, very important that we make sure that it is not compromised because that one cell thick barrier is what's determining what gets in and out from our digestive tract. So for me, by healing my gut, it's kind of you say this all the time, it's the chicken or the egg. Was that me reducing the inflammation from the foods helped to me to heal my gut? Almost certainly. But did me healing my gut help me have less of an impact on the inflammatory foods? Also, almost certainly. So talk to us a little bit about the gut barrier panel and why you introduced it and added it as part of the testing process.
Yeah, so like every overnight success, we've been at this about 15 years now. When I first started, I was out, selling kits and kind of getting some feedback from providers. And what they would say, James, is, look, we love the fact it's the only patented test on the market. We love this multiple pathway approach. We love the fact that, you're eliminating these false positives, and that's helping with compliance. We love all those things. But they say to me, we think some of our clients have leaky gut. So on that basis, we don't run a food sensitivity test. So that kind of stuck in my mind. And frankly, in their defense, at the point, there was not a good leaky gut test. So I understood why they did it because they weren't sure what was happening here. So it kind of stuck with me to say, why don't we, rather than kind of, as you say, as Ryan was rightly, articulating, do we look at just the foods and then look at the gut? Or do we say, actually, there's probably a pretty strong overlap, and I always coin it, which came first, as Ryan was saying, the chicken or the egg? And so, again, our approach was, let's make sure we can give the provider the ability to look at both at the same time. And so with this gut barrier panel, what we looked at was kind of like 4 different markers. One of them was a thing called as Candida, and we use that as an early indicator of dysbiosis. But in layman's terms, kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Is there something going on that your provider and you as an individual want to take care of and look at in a pretty serious way? And then to Ryan's point, that cell deep is looking at 2 different elements with it. There was a marker called zonulin that was discovered by a guy called Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's based in Boston here. Again, and his link was and the links with celiac disease. And that looks really at how well they're functioning, these tight junctions. And then the other element was one called occludin, which looks at how well structurally those are staying together. And so that's very important as well. And then because it's a gut healing marker, we also wanted to add a thing called LPS, which is lipopolysaccharides, or best defined by a good friend of mine, Dr. Rob Silverman, who calls it El Diablo. Because basically, if LPS comes up, things aren't good in the stomach. So you need to make sure you take care of that as well. So we looked at adding these 4 markers, and then we added 2 different pathways, given you're probably getting the fact that James likes multiple pathways. So one of them was a thing called IgA1 and 2, which basically tells you if that's elevated, it's localized in your gut, and it's still at an early stage. The second one is the IgG and the complement, which we've talked about, which we use for the foods. And if it's elevated on there, then at that point, what we can tell you pretty clearly is it's been going on for a longer time period. As well, it's more systemic in terms of the nature of the symptoms. So it's color-coded, it's green or red to make sure, none of us have to be a PhD to work that out. We've got all those guys working in the lab here who tell us that. But we want to make sure it's easy for you and your provider. And we even write on the report now, if any of those 8 markers are elevated, please refer to your provider with regards a good gut healing protocol. And we've provided those to them by partnering with some great companies. So the likes of Biotics, Nutridyne, Designs for Health, Again, and there's a number of others as well. So what we've then done on top of that is we partnered with a group called FullScript. So you've got access to that through FullScript as well. So what we've tried to do is make it easy for both the patient and the provider. Provider and patients, I recognize, are the busiest people on the planet. So let's make sure we simplify things. So again, back to that demystification again, to try and keep it simple so you guys can understand what we're trying to tell you so that you can act on it. Because again, what I quickly realized is if we gave you a number, say 23, may be good for a local bus in Connecticut, but it's not very helpful to tell you, what's the severity when it comes to my occludin or my LPS or my zonulin, which most of us haven't heard of. But if we see it being red, warning, positive, maybe I need to act on it. And so that's what our thinking is. And again, we've got the guys in-house who can tell you what those numbers mean. But at this level, what we're trying to do is make sure it's clear and accessible to both you and your provider.
Yeah, and I would say the majority of people we test have at least one. I would say most people have between 2 and 4 of the 8 markers.
Wow.
And that, to me, is a signal of the epidemic that we're dealing with. And again, this is me just, connecting a couple dots of things I see, but we certainly have no shortage of chronic disease, autoimmune disorders, mental health disorders going on. And I think that one of the root causes is our gut. The bacteria, the good bacteria that we're supposed to have, the things that are not supposed to be in there that have gotten into our food supply, the toxic exposure. I recently learned that there's 40,000 new to nature chemicals we're exposed to every single day. So a lot of those get into our gut. And so that bacteria, when it gets out of whack, the good bacteria gets low, the bad bacteria gets high, and that can lead to all sorts of different downstream issues. So this is a really important tool for us. And the number one question I get, again, most people have at least one, if not multiple. They say, Ryan, what do I do about this? And so we've actually at the Feel Good Lab partnered with some of the companies you just mentioned to bring out some of our favorite products that we've used at the pharmacy for decades to help people with their gut. One of my favorite ones. So this is what I did. And these are not just me, but myself and some patients at the pharmacy, and what caused us to create a couple of these products. We launched a product we call Gut Restore that has L-glutamine, which is a really great fuel for those cell linings as they start to replenish themselves, because the cell wall lining wants to replenish itself every 3 days very consistently. And so if it's depleted in some of those, the fuel that it needs to do such, especially if we have pro-inflammatory foods in a leaky gut state, we want to really jumpstart that process. And we find that patients that use that during the food elimination timing, it's kind of, you get 2 birds with 1 stone. You're really helping to restore the gut lining at the same time of cutting out those inflammatory foods. It expedites the process a little bit to start feeling a lot better. And then the other tools that we use, a good probiotic, right? And we typically recommend people would change that every couple of months, because we don't want to just overwhelm the body with anything, especially when there's so many different strains of bacteria in the gut. If you just give it one bacteria for years on years and years, well, then all of a sudden that's going to put things out of, proper function. And then I take a digestive enzyme because, again, gluten and dairy sneaks its way into my diet as much as I try to keep it out. And so that just helps my body break those things down. And so those 3 tools for me are what I credit, as well as, most importantly, cleaning up my diet. To me, 50% of the game was cleaning up my diet, and then 50% of the game was fueling my gut in a way to help it heal itself that now I've been able to sustain for many years.
Yeah, and there's studies coming out the whole time. Whether it's weight or diet, are linked now increasingly with some of these really bad diseases like cancer. It's obesity. Everything is linked. So again, if you can control your diet, but do it on an individualized basis that says, look, Ryan is gluten, James might be eggs, and so it's like whatever it might be. If you can help take that out, it's going to help your overall health. And I think that's the great thing about this. It's trying to give people easy and, again, actionable ways of taking control of their own health versus going, oh my gosh, I don't really understand this 30-page report. And again, I don't have time to go and do a 4-year PhD to understand it either. So what I want to try and do is get an easy to understand way of understanding how I can action and improve my own health rather than being totally dependent on third parties the whole time.
Yeah. One thing that I see happening, so I see 2 things. One is the pendulum, in my opinion, is swinging especially for younger people that are realizing we do need to take our health into our own hands and start to be proactive and preventative. And food is medicine. I think it was Confucius that said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." And so we're starting to see that a little bit. But there's also some things that are scaring me, and I want to caveat this with I know nothing about this drug that I'm about to talk about, but just the idea of it scares me. I'd love your opinion on it. It's Ozempic. And it's this idea that I've seen all these commercials and, you get a shot a week and it helps you lose weight. And I've briefly done a little research to see some of the side effects, that some of that weight is coming from areas we don't want it to. But here's what scares me. It's not whether that drug works or not. It's that we have access to this shortcut that, to me, the root cause of a lot of our health issues in the United States are controllable. Not easy, not necessarily cheap. But when you think about most people that are dying of a certain condition on their deathbed, the one thing that they would spend all of the money they have in their bank for is one more day, let alone another year or another decade. So our health is more important than anything else. But sometimes when we're living our life, we don't prioritize it as such. Do you have any thoughts on kind of this trend with things like Ozempic?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, it seems it's that old adage, isn't it? If it's too good to be true, generally it is too good to be true. And I think, like a lot of these things, back in the day, I remember when, for example, I'm a twin, and my mother was given this sage advice by her physician at the time. Mrs. White, you better sit down and have a cigarette. Well, I guess there's not many physicians who would suggest that now if you had a multiple birth about to be coming. So again, I think as years go on, we recognize what's good for you and what's not good for you. I think it's one of those things that good luck to anyone who's having great results with it, and if it brings them to a long-term change and focus on their health, but this is the Kickstarter they need, then maybe that's a great thing. But to your point, if it becomes an over reliance on it, then that's the issue, and that famous James Corden, side effects may include. It's like, who knows what side effects may include, and I think that's always the danger with a lot of these drugs. It's a lot of those things are glossed over, and as you rightly point out, you've done some of the research into that. I've just been hearing anecdotally about it, and yeah, I mean, I think that the reality is control what's going into your engine in terms of your food, and if we can individualize that advice, then I think that's the best possible advice we can give you versus as ever, whenever it's a one size fits all, that's always generally something to be wary about.
Yeah, and I'm certain that this is life-saving for some people.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that it is a great tool in the toolbox for practitioners to be able to use for people that are weight loss resistant, that really need to get their weight under control, or else it could be catastrophic. But again, to my point earlier, it's my concern is that we get this shortcut for people that could be doing the harder things, which is exercise and diet. And when you use it in conjunction with this, maybe it will be that jumpstart that we need. So I'm still optimistic. And the last thing I want to end on, James, is we've been dealing with a cool demographic here at the Feel Good Lab and at my dad's pharmacy recently, which is elite athletes. Not just like, I consider myself an athlete, right? I'm 36-year-old. I still play basketball. I play golf. I can't wait for my son to grow up and be an athlete. But I'm talking like some of the fittest, most elite athletes in the world. And what we're finding is they still have a lot of areas for improvement when we dig into their genetics, their micronutrients, and their food inflammation and sensitivity. So it's been a really cool way that we can actually up-level their performance. What do you think about that space of a human performance? Because this is where it goes from sick people to elite athletes, but that combination of everything in between is where you and I fall, right? And so these tools, I believe, could help everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, we did a good friend of mine's son who's looks like he may well be will be in Paris for the Olympics as a triathlete, and he's an unbelievably fit guy and very smart in many ways. We tested him. It turned out to be gluten for him. He actually gained 10 pounds in weight, or no, that's right, he lost 10 pounds in weight, which is remarkable. And he said, improved his swim time no end. And he said, because I just didn't realize that my engine wouldn't tolerate that. And, this is a sharp individual. So I think at that end, I still think there's a lot of mileage they can make on individualizing the advice they get, because I don't think that's happening as much. And then literally, this morning I had a doctor. Doctor, you'd think he'd know everything, wouldn't he? He said to me, look, I'm just turning 50. He said, I feel 25. I said, well, that's fantastic. I said, what happened? He said, well, I ran the test. He said, all the foods and stuff I had totally under control, but I didn't even know I had leaky gut. He said, and every time I exercised, my knees would kind of blow up. He said, because I managed to heal my gut and avoid that inflammation, he said, I'm exercising like a 25-year-old again. So again, I think we always assume that people have a better understanding of these things at either end of those spectrums than we imagine. And so I think it's, if you're James and you're just trying to control your triglycerides, or, some guy trying to get to the Paris Olympics, I think we're all the same. If we can identify which are the individual and personalized triggers, then that's where you're going to really win. And I think that's where working with like a feel good is so critical for people, because you can really take that information and the data and really help drive your own personal goal, whatever that might be.
Yeah, and I'm going to give all the credit to my dad and my brother. I mean, they're my heroes when it comes to this stuff, because they're working one-on-one with patients, and we're just taking the amazing work that they're doing and trying to bring it out to more people. And this is a little contradictory, because most important thing that we've learned is everybody is unique. It's why we love this test. Every single test report I've gotten back, I don't think of the hundreds we've done, I have any two that are the same, right? Now, some are similar, of course, but none are the same. And every person we've tested has had at least one food we'd call healthy that in their body may be causing this low level systemic inflammation. So that's really where, we're going. We're moving as not just a company, but as a society to this more personalized approach. But I always like to, and this is where it's a little contradictory, James, but I'd love, we love to give our audience actionable advice that they can do. Now, one is certainly to dig in a little bit to cleaning up their diet. We've talked a lot about that. But what do you see, or what do you do yourself that, you would potentially give us some advice, anecdotal, general population, but that could make a big difference in how people are feeling every day?
I think that one of the key things is reading labels. And again, when if you can, I travel a lot, and so it's if you can control what you're consuming on the road can be difficult. So I heard a great one of just taking one of a bottle, just an empty bottle, so you can always have access to water, because amazing how dehydrated you get when you're traveling around places. So I know spring break's coming up and there's going to be a lot of dehydrated people around, but the reality is, if you can, when you travel, kind of do that. And I always bring fruit with me, so again, you can have some access to something, because generally the quality of stuff when you go through those airports is not fantastic. So again, I'd like to think it's on the improvement and it's going to change, but that's one of the things, one of the kind of hacks I do is make sure I always get access to water, and make sure I've got fruit with me. So you've got some access to stuff when you're traveling. And a quite small aside on that, we do lots of lunches at trade shows and stuff where we bring in speakers. And one of the things that we've done at those is, again, it's tough to be a food sensitivity company. If the first lunch we did, they brought in, Wonder Bread, processed cheese, and processed ham sandwiches. So again, we spend a bit more on those lunches, and I hope some of the providers out there will have appreciated the fact that at least we're giving them a square meal when they're at those conferences. But anytime when you're on the road, it's tough, and so wherever you can try and bring some of those things to kind of help you, I think is, because again, when you're in your day-to-day routine, generally we can all be pretty good, but it's those are the times I think is often when we err.
Well, thank you, James. Hey, this has been amazing. Thank you, the whole team at KBMO, Dr. Dorville, for being such a great partner for us. And we're excited about some of the things that you're working on behind the scenes. Where both of our businesses are going over the next, few years and decade. And we look forward to having you as a great partner as we both kind of grow together. So thanks so much.
Likewise. All right. Thanks again, Ryan. Much appreciated.